See this? This is important. These places are important. We might call these historic places, we might call them old places, we might call them heritage places, heritage environment, but these are important places, and they're important for human flourishing. And that's something that we forget in the US when we talk about this thing that we call historic preservation. Because historic preservation is not supposed to be about the things around us. We don't preserve the things around us for their own sake. We don't exist to preserve things. The things around us that help give us a better environment, they help us. And so this question that we have about why do we keep these places around, again comes back to human flourishing. We keep these places because it helps us, it helps people. And this is something that we often forget in the field of historic preservation, because it's so incredibly focused on things and not on people. And we might talk about this in our college classes that we do. We might talk about this in our public meetings, how sense of place matters to people and the cultural environment is important. But when we go back to the 70% of all the jobs that are paid in historic preservation that drive historic preservation practice, what is historic preservation? When you come down to the dollars, it's about public policy. It's about rules and regulations. And public policy at the local and the state and the federal level in the United States is not about people. It is absolutely about things. And we might talk around this in many ways in historic preservation, but the reality is historic preservation, if we look at what the dominant practice of historic preservation is, regulatory environment, public policy, it's not about people. That's really important to remember. We talk about a lot of things in historic preservation about why these places are important. This is very, very fundamental to what we do in historic preservation. And the first place that we often go is the aesthetics of these places. We give architectural style names to these places. We categorize these places. We do architectural surveys, and we establish whether or not, say for instance, an historic district is important because it's a collection of these architectural styles. And even if they're vernacular, it's still looking at the objective qualities of the older built environment, parsing them down in a semi-quantitative way, and then categorizing them. That's what we do in historic preservation. That's what public policy does in historic preservation. The other thing that we do is we look at the facts, the historical facts that are associated with all these places that you see here. Well, in 1732, this person did this thing here. George Washington slept here. And somehow, if we amass enough facts, like stack them up to the moon, these places now are important to people. That's BS. That's not what makes places important to people. What makes places important to people, again, is what they do for people, and I'll talk about that. The last thing that we often talk about in historic preservation is the environmental reasons we save these places. And that's actually a really strong argument, because if you look at environmental conservation, which goes to sustainability and to slowing down climate change, it's centered around an R word. It's called recycling, recyclability. And that's pretty important, because in a disposable society, the more stuff we put in landfills, the more stuff that's disposable, the worse it is for the environment. It's a very simplistic view. It goes the same for buildings. If we're talking about that we're concerned about climate change, we want to save the planet, then we need to talk about, much more seriously, saving buildings, recycling buildings, reusing buildings. And we're really good about this argument in historic preservation because we have this word we call adaptive use or adaptive reuse, where we encourage the reuse of historic buildings. But when you look at the older built environment, the majority of the older built environment is not historic. In other words, it's not been officially declared historic. And who's talking about these places? Just average, everyday older places that might not rise to some sort of architectural significance to make this place important. in an objective public policy way, well, they still have value for recycling. And again, we're really good about talking about this in historic preservation. As long as these places are officially like on a historical register, they're declared officially historic, they can get historic tax credits, and then we're all about recycling buildings. But then the historic preservation field, when we talk about the older built environment in general, we're silent about the reuse of things that aren't historic because they don't exist to us. And that's a big problem. So I want to talk about this idea of people's connections to place, to historic places, and why these places are so important. And it relates to human flourishing. So if you look at the past couple of decades of research from the social sciences, and a lot of this goes back to psychology, including my own research in this area, the public's perception values meaning. The reason why they like old places doesn't go down to architectural styles. It's not about historical facts. And unfortunately, it's also not about sustainability and recycling and environmental conservation. It's about people's emotional connection to places, how they feel about a place, how they feel when they're walking through their downtown or the neighborhood they live in, and it's the feeling that this place gives them. And we have a very technical name for this in environmental psychology. We call this place attachment. But what that means is that's people's emotional connection to these older places, because these places actually give them a feeling. And if you disrupt that by demolishing the buildings and demolishing the places, you actually literally hurt people emotionally. It's called place disruption. And the environmental psychology literature has a whole bunch of stuff about this that you can look at that I'm not going to go into here. But the idea here is that the average person in the US who likes historic places, it's about an emotional connection. And back to public policy, it doesn't exist. Emotional connections to historic places, we can certainly talk about it until the moon is blue, but public policy doesn't officially recognize emotion. It doesn't officially recognize subjectivity. If it can't be reduced down to facts and things that are objective, it doesn't exist in public policy. As much as we might want to talk about and pretend that it does, it doesn't. And that's why I'm talking to you now, because that emotional connection with places needs to be a central part of how we do historic preservation in the United States. We have to stop ignoring the dominant reason why people like historic places. And I'm going to say this again. The dominant reason why people like historic places is for their emotional connection to those places. When you have a healthy emotional connection to places, which is catalyzed by older places, and there's a bunch of research out there, including my own, that looks at how the uniqueness of older built environments, including the way their surfaces change over time, we have this fancy word we call a patina, actually somehow does something almost magical in that it engenders a positive emotional connection with places. That doesn't happen with new places that have the exact same design. Age actually adds emotional value to places. And again, public policy doesn't go anywhere near this, and most people don't talk about this at all. But the literature is out there, the research is out there. It ought to be influencing how we teach historic preservation and how it's actually practiced in this country. So while I used to be a university professor until a couple of years ago, and my research has long been in this area of people's emotional connection to places. And a lot of people in the historic preservation field, they don't like this because it might threaten their own research. It might threaten their own personal reasons why they thought historic preservation was important. But it can be a very difficult place to be in an environment where your colleagues say, I hate your research. You need to stop doing it. You need to research more stuff about things. You're focused too much on people. This is the stuff I was hearing over and over and over again. And I was being told, don't teach this to students. You got to teach stuff that's objective. You need to teach things that the students have been told is important about historic preservation for the past 150 years. Don't do this social science stuff. So anyways, being in the center of that, in the attacks, I left higher education. I left this behind. I didn't want to deal with that environment. It actually causes a lot of health issues and you know, if you think about a hostile work environment, that's obviously what I'm talking about. And why the hell would I want to stay in that? So I didn't. I walked away. But one of the things that I didn't stop doing was this. This is the book that I was writing back when my colleagues started attacking me. This book, my colleagues did not want to come out. Managing the Magic of Old Places. Why do I say magic? Because it is about people's emotional connection to places. It's not about real magic, but it's about how places are magical. It goes to the core of what my colleagues hated about my research. The subjectivity about it, the people's emotional connection with place. And that book is about people, and it's about why people like historic places. It's threatening to the field of historic preservation. Although from the response I've been receiving to this so far, a lot of people are really interested in it because they've been at least anecdotally observing, you know, it's like, why are we doing the way we do historic preservation around all these objective things around art history, values, and historical facts? We need to do something about paying attention to what people actually like about historic places. But I guess, you know, why can't we recognize this? You know, why is this field the way it is? Those are the kinds of questions that I'm addressing in this book, and I address in a kind of a depth that has never been done before. But this journey that I've made between being attacked in higher education and doing this book opened up my alter ego. And this is it. That's my musical project. I call it Nova Terminus, and it is part of my emotional catharsis to try and deal with the endless harassment and attacks and gaslighting that I was receiving as an academic. It actually helped me recover. So it's why I'm here. The only reason that book got finished is because I did my music, and it gave me a place to recover, to look at all the crap that I was going through, and the absolute ridiculousness of my colleagues' arguments. That we need to be focusing on people. And for have a colleague come up to me, more than one colleague, over and over, that I'm focusing too much on focusing too much on people, and not enough on things. What the hell is wrong with a field where you would have any number of colleagues coming up to you and telling you that? Something is wrong. And anyways, I decided, you know, I need to publish the book. I need to finish it, and I did. And my publisher, University of Tennessee Press, they thought it needed to be published. They supported me in it. I thank them greatly to help me get this actually done. So I have this book now, and you can read the book as well and get a much better sense of what I mean when I went back to the beginning of this conversation, and that is, why are older places important for people? It's about human flourishing. And so managing the magic of older places is that. It's an exploration of the intersection of human flourishing and older places. But most importantly, by understanding what that is, and I call it the magic of older places, of old places, the big question is then how do we do that to inform our public policy framework in the United States? And I'll be talking more about that in some of these future videos.